Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están ustedes esta noche? En este video les quiero hablar un poquito de cómo decir la hora y hay que tener en cuenta que existen muchas maneras diferentes de decir la hora en español. Pero vamos a empezar con unos conceptos básicos. Hello, I hope everybody's doing well. I want to talk about how to tell time in Spanish. You want to keep in mind that it varies from region to region. There's, of course, a textbook way of doing things, and then there's sort of the real world way. And there is actually sometimes a difference between what's taught in the textbook and the way people say it in a particular area. Um, First of all, I want to mention that usually when a Spanish speaker asks what time it is, they don't actually, he or she will not usually use the word time. Instead, they're going to use the word hour or the word hora to ask what hour is it. So the basic question then would be ¿Qué hora es? Or you might hear somebody say ¿Qué hora tiene? Which just means what time do you have? Regardless of whether they use ¿Qué hora es? Or if they use ¿Qué hora tiene? The answer is basically going to be the same. We'll start with 1 o'clock because the 1 o'clock hour, because it's just 1 hour, is done a little bit differently than the other times. With 1 o'clock, you're going to have to make everything singular because you just have 1 hour. You also want to keep in mind that the word hour in Spanish, hora, is a feminine word. So we're going to have to use the feminine word for the before the hour, the word la. So, for example, if somebody were to ask me, ¿Qué hora es? And I want to say it's 1 o'clock, I would say, es la una. Here again, for 1 o'clock only will you use the singular es and the singular la. From 2 o'clock to 12 o'clock, because you now have more than 1 hour, you're going to change from es la to son las. So, for example, if somebody asks me ¿Qué hora es? And I look at my watch and it's 2 o'clock, I would change from es la, I would change to son las dos. Or if it's 3 o'clock, son las tres. Or if I want to say it's 9 o'clock, son las nueve. So for all of the other times besides 1 o'clock, the format's going to be son las. The other thing in Spanish that you want to keep in mind is it's similar to English usually in this regard. They tend to say the hour first and then the minutes. Most textbooks teach that you would say the hour first and then you would put in the word and, which in Spanish is the word y, and then you would say the minutes. So, for example, if I wanted to say it's 4:05, I could say son las 4:05. So that's a very common way to do it using the hour, the word and then the minutes. In the area that I live, in which I live, and I know this is also true in Mexico, you will hear some variation. For example, sometimes the E or the and is omitted altogether, and they'll just say the hour and the minutes. I think because of the influence of English and the fact that it's said that way in English. Also, another variation is that sometimes you'll hear the word con for with substituted, it will substitute the word and. So, another way to say that it's 4:05, you could also say, también se puede decir, son las 4:05. 4 with 5 minutes. Son las 4:05. That's a very common format. There are special terms used in Spanish to refer to both the quarter hour and the half hour. The word for quarter in Spanish is cuarto. And so if I wanted to say, for example, it's 1:15, I could say it's 1:15, which would be es la 1:15. There's also a special term used for the half hour, and it's the word media. So like if I wanted to say it's 8:30, I could say son las 8:30. There are also special terms used for both 12 o'clock noon and 12 o'clock midnight. If somebody asks me ¿Qué hora es? And I look at my watch and it's 12 o'clock noon, I could say es mediodía, and the word mediodía just means midday or noon. If I wanted to say it's midnight, then it would change to medianoche. Es medianoche. So that's another common term that's used when you're telling time. Now, when you get past the half hour in Spanish, the traditional way that I've seen it taught in textbooks is to go to the next hour. For example, let's say that it's 6:50. To say that in Spanish, it's usually taught that you go up to the next hour 7 and then you say 7 minus 10. So, for example, to say 6:50, I could say son las 7 menos 10, where I'm using the word menos to mean minus. Now, keep in mind that here again, in certain parts of, for example, Mexico and in the United States, los Estados Unidos, you're going to hear it said differently. That doesn't mean that one of them is wrong or one of them is right. They're just different. Some purists would say that it's only correct to say son las 7 menos 10. But I believe that languages evolve and they change. And so you're going to find that in Mexico in particular, and parts of the United States, it's much more common to say that it differently. One way that they may say it is, instead of saying it's 7 minus 10, they may just say it as 6:50. So they might say, son las 6:50 minutos. Or they may choose to say it where they count forward instead of backwards, stating the minutes first. Usually when they do it that way, they would use the verb faltar, which means to be lacking or absent. So I could say, for example, faltan 10 minutos para las 7, meaning it's 10 minutes till 7. Or if I wanted to say it's a quarter till 8 o'clock, falta un cuarto para las 8. So that's another very common method that's used, at least in the area that I live in. Now, one last thing in terms of basic time telling. How would I convey the idea of AM or PM? If it's like 7 o'clock in the morning, usually what you'd want to use is you'd want to attach de la mañana at the end of the phrase. So I could say it's 7 of the morning. And by the way, de la mañana just means of the morning. So I might say, son las 7 de la mañana. Once it's past 12 o'clock noon, you would tend to switch to of the afternoon, which would be de la tarde for PM. So if I wanted to say it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon or of the afternoon, I could say son las 3 de la tarde. And then after the sun sets, although it's going to vary from country to country, usually you would switch to de la noche for of the evening. So if I wanted to say it's 11 o'clock at night, I could say son las 11 de la noche. Let's see, what else that has to do with time? There was one more thing. Yeah, military time. Military time tends to be, I think, a little more commonly used outside of the United States. To give the time in Spanish as a military time, they don't say it as 100 hours. They just would say the number, and then usually the difference between the time, giving the time as we've just talked about, is that they would also include the word horas in the statement. So, for example, let's see, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That would be 1,500 hours, right? So, if I wanted to say it's 1,500 hours in Spanish, I could just say son las 15 horas, and then just put the word horas at the end of it. So basically then, that's time telling in Spanish in a nutshell. We'll talk about in another video the related question of asking somebody at what time, where it changes up a little bit. But here again, to summarize, you want to remember that the hours in Spanish, hora is a feminine, and you need the word la or las in there before the number, and that the number 1 or the first 1 o'clock hour is the only one that's done as a singular, es la una. Then you would switch from switch to son las for the rest of them, 2 to 12 o'clock. And then the other big thing to remember is that there are a lot of different ways that the time can be said, and in my opinion, it's not that one's right or wrong, they're just different. You want to be familiar with some of these differences, especially if you're going to a region where they do say the time a little bit differently than what you're taught in your typical textbook. Okay, that's basically it. Gracias por su atención y espero que ustedes hayan aprendido algo y hasta la próxima. Adiós.